Hi, this is me, Hilary from the On Humans podcast, and here's a little bit of something special for this week. For two reasons. One is a very mundane reason. I had to postpone the recording that was set for this week about the prehistory of war. So that episode would be out a little bit later, and there was a slot to be filled. But then something came that might just do the job to fill the slot. For the first time, one of the guests of this show has won the Nobel-Prize. This is Daron Acemoglu, who won the Nobel-Prize for economics about his work with James Robinson and Simon Johnson. And, I thought that it would be nice to celebrate this moment. I am a huge fan of Acemoglu's work, as you might guess. Not necessarily always agreeing with his conclusions, but I am one of those who celebrates the fact that there are people at the very core of economics who are good with maths, but don't work only with mathematical abstraction, but with a genuine interest in global history. At the same time, it's also worth noting that the Nobel Prize was very much awarded to Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson about their early work on global inequality. But Acemoglu's recent work with the other winner, Simon Johnson, was not mentioned. So how does that work fit with Acemoglu's Nobel Prize-winning work, popularized in books such as Why Nations Fail? Well, this is one of the tough questions that I was lucky enough to be able to ask him, and I wanted to highlight his answer to that question in this little snippet from the original. This was really, I think, my favorite part of the conversation, because we talked about what's wrong with the modern economy, but not in the way that you might expect a Nobel Prize winner to talk about it. This was much more understandable and much more humane than what you would have expected, perhaps. Indeed, it turns out that for Daron Acemoglu to fix the modern economy, we might have to start by acknowledging and celebrating humanity itself. So here is Nobel laureate Daron Acemoglu one more time. Enjoy. The book that will probably be the most famous amongst listeners, which is Why Nations Fail, a really wonderful book. So is your new one, and I do see some tension.
Well, we evolve, don't we?
Yeah, we do, but let me make the Acemoglu 10 years ago argument, as I could understand it, which is that we wouldn't have been fine throughout history in terms of technological growth. But that's because we lived in highly extractive societies. So a wonderful example of this comes from the windmills in the Middle Ages in your book, where when some common peasants want to build their own windmill, the abbot tells them that you're absolutely not allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a highly extractive society, and therefore the common people cannot enjoy the benefits of technological progress. However, we now live in not perfectly inclusive societies, but for example, in the US or in Western Europe, we live in liberal democracies with all the kinds of things that Why Nations Fail as a book emphasizes: property rights, inclusive political institutions, relatively well-functioning democracies. Of course, we have a lot of flaws if we read the daily news, but from the broad sweep of history, of course, we live in deeply inclusive societies compared. And maybe now here, when you answer, you can maybe we can start moving and focusing more on your pessimism around the last 50 years, because I think that Why Nations Fail would have given me a much more optimistic view about where we would be going now. That would have convinced me that it's enough to have technology plus these things like open markets, property rights, liberal democracy, and then we'll be happy ever after. So to the extent that there is a conflict there, and I am interpreting it right, how would you convince your past self that we're not going to be just rolling along?
Let me defend both perspectives in some sense, although it is true that my view and interpretation has changed a little bit. So Why Nations Fail is a more macro history. We're trying to explain, why the world is different today than it was in 1500, and why, say, Europe, Finland, Sweden, Germany, England are so much more prosperous than Latin America or Africa. From that macro perspective, I would completely agree with my earlier self that inclusive institutions are key. And one of the things that they do is actually allow technology adoption, and that technology adoption has been great. And looking again at that from that macro perspective, I would say Silicon Valley is fantastic. Without Silicon Valley, you wouldn't have had the same level of entrepreneurship, risk-taking, and innovativeness in the United States in a very, very important set of sectors centered on information technology and communication technologies. But once we zero into our current episode, it's not just the technological change that becomes central, but it's the direction of technology. Then looking at the history from that point of view, you also see the direction of technology being quite a significant factor in other episodes as well. So, in that sense, at the macro perspective, Why Nations Fail omitted the important critical role of the direction of technology. So, the common thing about Why Nations Fail in my current perspective is that in both uh, approaches, in both books, the power structure matters. Who has the power to control technology? But in Why Nations Fail, the most important aspect that we emphasize is whether you allow those innovations and or whether you try to set up and live with a coercive structure.
Because the elites are better off without a dynamic economy.
Sometimes they are afraid of technology, sometimes
Yeah.
they don't see the need, sometimes they see it
Yeah.
as destabilizing. So those were the things that we emphasized in Why Nations Fail. Was that the full picture? No. Did I think at the time that was the full picture? No. But now I see it as more important to have also dwelled on the direction of technology. But there's one other difference, and let me come back to that, which is again something that Jim and I were somewhat aware, but my thinking has evolved on this. Looking at Latin America, where for most of its history coercion has been rampant, and Africa to Asia, if you asked us about power, which also part of the subtitle of Why Nations Fail, we would have emphasized economic, political, and military power. But today, we argue, Simon and I argue, sorry, that persuasion power
Hmm.
is even more important than tanks and, armaments. This is why, Silicon Valley is a mixed blessing. It's the environment, it's the risk taking and entrepreneurship hub, but at the same time, it has become a dominant persuasive power over society, imposing its view of digital technologies, its view of future of technology, future of work, and making us complacent about inequality. And that I see as very dangerous. And let me give you one example of what I mean by that. We just mentioned the progressive movement and how they reversed the whole of the robber barons. You might say they did something that was much harder. It should be much easier to do today because they didn't have direct democracy. Senators were not directly elected, and they were one of the biggest supporters of the robber barons because that's where they got their money for election or into their pockets. The federal government had no tools. There was no Federal Reserve, no income tax, no regulatory tools. It's very different from today. They did it then. We should be able to do it now. But actually, there's one big difference. I think the tech sector's persuasive power is much greater than what the robber barons
Hmm.
ever had.
Interesting. So Standard Oil was broken up, but Facebook isn't, partially because tech optimism has become, in a way, part of our ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think for me, when thinking about whether the techno optimism is works or not, whether we should be techno optimists or more pessimist, I think one of the most striking things that I learned from your work is that real wages of a lot of people have been going up in, for example, the US for the past 50 years, but not for men without university education.
Well, actually, I emphasize men without a college degree or men with a high school degree because they are the most striking.
They basically haven't had any wage growth.
They've had a wage decline, but it's not some people. 60% of the U.S. workforce does not have a college degree, and on average, that group has had zero or very little wage growth in for about 50 years.
And you have calculations suggesting that, do I remember right, that maybe 2/3 of this is because of automation, 1/3 because of globalization?
Yeah, something like that. And look, I mean, I think that's a really striking number. It is clear that we have created a two-tiered society in the United States. The social status, the regards, the self-worth that people are allowed to have really depends on whether you have a college degree or not. And that is again ideological, that is again a social choice, and it is a function of technology and how we're using technology.
But the problem, I mean, I think that it's easy for anyone listening to agree. And just looking at the political consequences, of course, we can see how difficult the situation is. But what is the alternative? Because you're not a break the machine, let's go back to Stone Age kind of person.
Oh, absolutely not. I am an optimist. Look, I'm an optimist for the following reason. So let's see. So this is the On Humans podcast. So this is a really important part of the argument. First of all, every time you question anything that is being done in the current technological field, Every time you question Silicon Valley, you are accused of being a Luddite.
Yeah, machine breaker.
I am not a Luddite, even though I think, the history of the Luddites is completely misinterpreted. Luddites were not just break the machines, they were trying to complain about the way in which the machines were being used. But let's leave that aside. I am not saying we should block technological change. Far from it. I think technological change has been an engine of prosperity and will be an engine of prosperity if we use it right. If you want an analogy, those who say block the technology are like trying to stop the flow of a river. That's both inadvisable and very, very difficult. What I'm saying is let's redirect some of the flow towards places where it will do less damage and it will create more social good. And I have a very specific way in which I think we should conceptualize the social good from technology. Unfortunately, this is a word Simon and I do not use in the book. We should have, but I would summarize it as saying a pro-human direction of technology. And what I mean by pro-human is technological changes that are complementary to humans, that increase their capabilities, increase their information, their decision-making capability, their agency, their productivity, rather than sidelining them. Automation is something that's going to go on forever. I'm completely in favor of automation, but not when the only thing you do is automation. Because if you automate work and you don't do anything else, where do humans go? No, if you look at successful periods in which shared prosperity was built, you see a lot of automation, but you also see a lot of new tasks and new responsibilities for humans. That's what we should do.
And how do we do that?
I'll come back to that. But if you look at periods in which humans are cast aside, their agency is reduced, their autonomy is reduced, those are often sad periods, like the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. When you take people's decision-making capacity, when you turn them into cogs in the machine, that's not what's pro-human. If you manipulate humans, they don't become good citizens, they don't become good democrats. You have to use technology not in an anti-democratic way, but in a pro-democratic way. Actually, if you look from the outside, perhaps that's how it appears from Helsinki, and that's how many people from DC and New York interpret it. They look at Silicon Valley and they see, oh, these are very globalist, pro-democratic people. But I would actually say the general tendency in Silicon Valley is anti-democratic. Why? Because they do not appreciate the unique, versatile skills of humans. They see humans as fallible, making mistakes, needing to be steered by geniuses or by machines. That is not a pro-human direction. I don't think a society in which we do not respect, value, and enable the work that people who work with their hands do is going to be a happy society. An electrician, a carpenter, a gardener is as much doing a valuable, useful work as you and I sitting in our offices and doing mental work. But right now, we are giving you an amazing set of tools. Look at the tools that you have available at your fingertips for recording, for reaching the world.
Yeah, it really is wonderful.
And what about the electricians? We're not giving them anything. We're not giving them any tools. There are tremendous needs in the United States and in Europe for more and more electrical work. But we're not training electricians. We're not giving them any tools to identify problems, more complex problems in real time. We can do those easily. We can make them better decision maker, more informed, better trained. We're not doing that. So AI, artificial intelligence, and digital technologies, they are actually amazing tools for increasing human capabilities. That's not how we are using them. And that's because of this anti-democratic mindset in Silicon Valley.
And I think wonderful example of that is when Elon Musk said that he himself made a mistake trying to only use as much robots as possible.
Exactly. Well, at least Elon Musk admitted it.
Yeah, and he literally said humans are underrated.
Yes. Well, he said that, but then he's continued to, doing some of the same things, but at least he admitted it.
And you would say that Germany here provides a better path. In Germany, you see more use of robots than in the US in, for example, car manufacturing, but in a way that you say is actually conducive to people still working there with the robots. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to eulogize Germany. There are many things that are not sufficiently risk-taking in Germany. There are problems in the service sector and the supply chain in Germany, but for the big part of the manufacturing industry, you see German firms much better at using human skills. Why? First of all, labor is scarce in Germany. Just like in the 19th century in the United States, scarce labor becomes valuable. They do better. They have unions and work councils that provide an institutional basis for more pro-human directions of technology. They have a wonderful training system that prepares people to have a variety of job-specific, industry-specific skills, so they become more valuable to the companies. So rather than just sideline them, they train them even more. They turn them into technical employees.
It's a wonderful idea. I mean, I've never thought of unions in this way of how they can create unions and labor rights can create a kind of virtuous circle where if you have invested in them and if it's not easy to just sack them, you find ways to complement them rather than sidelining them.
Absolutely. But again, let me warn you, you are right not to have thought of it this way, because if you look at the UK and the United States, unions have often not played that role because union management relationship has been conflictual enough that more cooperative role has not emerged. But if you look at your own country, Finland, if you look at Sweden, you see more of that, and you see that in Germany, different institutional settings, different things being done.
Very interesting.
But you do need, I mean, I was originally skeptical of the corporatist model.
The Nordic, yeah.
Because there was too much of collusion between business leaders and governments. But I think the corporatist model is a wonderful way of taming the more conflictual parts so that workers and capital can work together.
Will demography solve all of our problems? Because on the one hand, we talk about everybody being mass unemployed because of AI. On the other hand, we talk about not having enough workers because our demographic structure is so bad and we have so many elderly people.
Yes, I think demography will help. First of all, Pasquale Restrepo and I have a paper that shows that a very large fraction of cross-country variation in robot adoption or automation adoption is explained by demographic factors, and countries that get their act together, such as Germany, South Korea, Japan, in response to demographic shocks, can use technologies in a way that works very well. And in fact, we have another paper that shows that fears of aging leading to macroeconomic imbalances or slow growth seem to be overrated. So yes, demographic factors are going to be useful. But again, institutions are key. If you have demographic change and you have the wrong institution, it's going to be a big combustible mix that is very dangerous. So the institutional adjustments has to facilitate the technological adjustment.
Okay, last question. All the wonderful work that you've done throughout the years, thank you so much for it. And how has that shaped your outlook on our species?
I think that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Ilari. And I think that 20 years ago, I would not have known how to answer this question. At least now I have an answer. And I think the answer to me is that we have not fully appreciated and celebrated the amazing diversity, creativity, adaptability, and unique, versatile skills that humans have. It is such an amazing outcome of evolution and institutional innovations and adaptations that we have built amazing societies with a very rich cultural diversity. And I would like to emphasize this point because there are two sets of currents that I think undervalue those skills. One is the drive for autonomous machine intelligence, especially now fueled with generative AI, which sidelines humans, undervalues humans, puts them not in the driver's seat, but in the back seat at the best of conditions. And the second, again, this sort of ideological current that puts people who work with their minds miles ahead of people who work with their hands. It's really the combination of hand and mind, our ability to reason and interact with the physical world that is so special about us, and that creates all that versatile diversity and enables many, many, many millions of us, billions of us to contribute to our very rich world and that we have built in the 21st century. So I think celebrating that great skills and versatility of humans is a central thing for the future.
Professor Daron Acemoglu, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ilari. It was a great conversation.
Okay, so that was it. It was a one more time Daron Acemoglu on this feed. Hopefully he'll be back with new material at some point. In the meanwhile, if you are new to the show, do subscribe to it. If you've listened to some episodes and you think I deserve it, give it a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're a long-term listener and you want to show some serious support, become a supporter at patreon.com/onhumans. You can pledge a small sum monthly. Thank you so much to all those wonderful people who have already done that move. Anyway, wherever you are, I hope that you tune in next time. Until then, take care.